All right, I want to start by thanking everybody for their time tonight. Thank you for joining us. It really means a lot for you to be here and have a platform to help you guys out. Tonight is also a really important day. This is kind of the first time that myself, Hunter Lakey, and Andrew Benham are coming together as a group to talk to a larger audience as partners. For those that don't know, we just formed a partnership and created the Diamond Sports Mentorship community. So we want to talk to you a little bit about that and what that entails. But first, I'm just going to go through the three of us. I'll give Andrew and Hunter the opportunity to introduce themselves, but I'll just start off. My name is Joe Padula. Whether you signed up through my link for this Zoom webinar or Andrew or Hunter's, I just want to give a brief synopsis of myself. So I'm at the University of Oklahoma. I coach softball and women's golf. I've been here for 3 years now. Prior to that, I did 2 years in the Kansas City Royals minor league system. So I spent some time in professional baseball. And just like Hunter and Andrew, I have ties to Texas Christian University. So that was my first internship in strength and conditioning. And I am the owner of Padula Performance LLC. So this community that we are now partnered in together was previously a mentorship community for my pragmatic principles course. So for you guys that maybe some of you guys have actually taken it here, but for those that have not, that was an exclusive community that is now open to the public for those that need support and want to be instructed and mentored to a higher level of coaching. Okay, so that's pretty much what I do. I'm in the education space, and I've brought Andrew and Hunter along with me. Hunter and Andrew co-founded together the Baseball Performance Network. I'll let Hunter right now introduce himself and talk a little bit about what the BPN is, and then we'll turn it over to Andrew. So, Hunter, if you want to give a brief rundown of who you are.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Joe. I appreciate you guys being here tonight. Hope my you guys don't hear my dogs outside barking, but I see a lot of familiar faces here, which is good to see. But my name is Hunter Lakey. All right, so I'm currently the assistant strength and conditioning coach at Georgia Southern University, where I work with baseball and swim and dive. Before that, I was at Mississippi State University for a brief stint, where I worked specifically with baseball. And then before that, I've obviously had a lot of different stops, interning at Elon University, Texas A&M football, TCU, which is actually funny enough where I met Andrew, kind of where this whole BPN thing kind of started. But whether you obviously, like Joe said, whether you joined from his link or my link or Andrew's link or the BPN link, the BPN was created to create a one-stop shop for the best baseball, softball, basically rotational athlete content available. I thought there were a lot of really, really good accounts on social media that were promoting a lot of really, really good things. And I thought with my following and a bunch of other of the coaches' followings, we can create a giant hub for athletes to be able to see good training, right? Especially on social media where it's a nice luxury where everything is free. So that was the big thing that we founded the BPN on. And then obviously when it came to this partnership with Joe, I mean, the biggest thing that we want from this community that we're creating here is to do the exact same thing we want at the BPN, which is to create the best community, the best platform possible to share the best content possible. Um, and obviously, we'll talk about this a little bit more. And if you have any more questions about the BPN or obviously this partnership that we have, feel free to put it in the chat. But I'm super excited to get to your questions tonight. And I'm going to leave the floor to Andrew.
What's up, guys? Andrew Benham here. Um, I am currently the director of baseball sports performance at the University of Virginia. Work obviously with baseball at Virginia. Before that, I had a stop at Elon University in 2022, where Hunter and I, you know, kind of tackled baseball together with the Elon baseball team. I was there for 1 year. Prior to that, I was at TCU where I originally met Hunter, and where, like Joe said, all three of us kind of crossed paths in that coaching tree at TCU. Did my GA position at Millersville University in PA and played 4 years of college baseball. So really excited to mentor a lot of you guys and share the education that we have in our time as Division I performance coaches. Really excited to start conversation, excited to learn from you guys just as much as I hope you guys can learn from us, and excited to answer questions tonight.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Hunter. Really quick before we start answering questions, I think one of the most important things that we need to cover is why we're even here tonight doing this and what the community stands for. And there's a lot of different things that I could say about this. I'm going to try to keep this really brief. But one of the main drivers for this community is that the bar for our profession needs to be raised. And I say that for a lot of specific reasons. Number one is that we're underpaid and we're overworked. I think that is a big, big problem. And I think it's because of the barrier for entry being low in our field. And the greater that we could make the average strength coach, the better off that we're going to be long term. So, what I see this community as is an investment in the future for the next generation of coaches. And what I also see is complacency with coaches. I see a lot of people that think they have it figured out. I think the Dunning-Kruger effect is a big term that circulates social media and our profession. And our goal is to stimulate consistent learning and attract people that actually have the desire to contribute to others as well as receive some further education for themselves. So, the thing that I'm most proud of with the community that we're building is that I could be away from my computer all day long and I will return to potentially dozens of messages sent between other people who are actively investing in coaches just like themselves. And when I know that Andrew and Hunter feel the same way, as did I, but when I was younger and when I was coming up as a strength coach, 6 years ago, when I was really studying this stuff and trying to break into the field, I didn't have anyone who was readily available to help me at all times. And what we're trying to do is put three high level Division One strength and conditioning coaches in front of you for the price of one to deliver constant education. What we do right now is provide guest speaker calls, and basically you are incentivized to ask as many questions as you want within this community. So that's our goal, is to meet you wherever you need to be met at based on the help that you need. And we're going to continue to add layers and tiers to our model here. Right now we just have a community, but we plan to add a actual one-on-one program into the course. For those that are familiar with my Pragmatic Principles course, I will be repurposing that and putting that into the community for a monthly rate instead of one hefty charge. So I've hired business mentors that are coaching me. I've spoken to people, I've consulted with other people on how to navigate this properly and provide the best value for you that we possibly can. And people like you are the people that we want. You're sitting here on Thanksgiving break. I bet that some of you don't have work this week. If you do, you're probably not doing as much. Maybe you have a full slate this week. But you're taking the first step that we want to see with the people that we want to come into this community to help contribute to something great. And it takes a lot, whether you think it's a big deal or not, to schedule an hour out of your evening, be away from your families, be away from your friends, whatever you've got going on, your children, whatever you got going on. To be here with us means the world, even if it's just, literally 16 of you right now. We had about 90 people register. I think most people think we're going to record this and post it, which we will. But that's our goal. Another really underrated aspect of this community, and I think this is going to intrigue a lot of you, is that we're opening this up to skill coaches as well. And the reason for that is that there's a major need for strength coaches in team sport to resonate and communicate properly with their skill coaches. If you asked every single Division One strength coach in the country what their number one problem was, if they could give you their 3 to 5 biggest problems, I would bet a lot of money that all of them would put conflicts with their coaching staff in that top 5, because there's no communication, there's no cohesiveness. You have one party that wants to do one thing and another party that wants to do another. I think I was talking to Andrew and Hunter about this the other night. FIFA and the soccer world, especially in Europe, have things figured out really, really well. They periodize practice. Their strength coaches are involved. The speeds that athletes are hitting in practice coincide with what the athletes are acclimated to on the strength and conditioning side. That hasn't made it into diamond sports yet. When I say diamond sports, I'm talking baseball, softball, of course. That hasn't made it over to us yet. And there's a lot of conflict. And I literally deal with this a lot with people that I work with, and even people that I work with over the internet, and then also people I've worked with in person. People are fired, people are vilified, and people are condemned for not being able to resonate with their skill coaches and actually communicate and bring objective athlete first thought to the table, and instead they will just concede and do whatever the sport coaches want. We can't allow that to continue to happen. So that's how I think I've been successful in my role, is being very upfront and honest about what we need. And I want to give people that same confidence and that same understanding. And every time that I present, you guys might have heard it, you will hear it if you join this community and you see the presentations that I'm giving and that Hunter and Andrew will give. They are always practical and usable immediately. So that's what we're trying to pursue here, okay? So if there's any questions regarding the actual community, we will get to those. We'll field those. We'd love to talk more about it and what's actually in the community and what we're trying to build out. Um, but we can just start with the first question here. So Tristan asks, how much sprinting plyometric work do you do in season? Hunter and Andrew, I've been rambling for the last 5 to 6 minutes here. So if you want to spearhead that question, and then I can add a little thought on the back end.
Yeah, I'll take the first part, Hunt, and then you can kind of finish it off. I in terms of how much sprinting and plyo work I do in season, I honestly I just try to touch max velocity in terms of the sprint work. I'll touch max velocity. I'll won't do a ton of ACell work because the diamond sports, like Joe referred to, are already acceleration dominant. I'm just trying to touch max velocity, and it's once a week, and it's before one of our lifts, one of our high CNS lifts. If I can sneak it in, after the warm up, that's when I'm gonna most ideally put it in on that day. In terms of plyometric work, extensive plyos, next to nothing. Next to nothing on the extensive plyometric side. They're already getting a ton of foot contacts. It's it's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday series. It's 3 hours. It's 2 hours of pregame work. They're getting a lot of foot contacts, and I'm not going to already fill that bucket that they're getting a lot of in season. So the sprint work, I'll touch max velocity. The acceleration, not so much. We don't have catapult with our baseball team, so I'm not able to, you know, pick guys out in terms of the workload on catapult. However, I do have high inning guys and low inning guys, and those two sprint programs look a little bit different in terms of volume. And then the plyometric side of that, Tristan, is next to nothing on the extensive plyometric side just because they're on their feet for so long in the game of baseball as it is.
Yeah, I mean, Andrew brought up a good point. I mean, I'll have two different sprint groups, and usually what I'll do is I'll actually microdose their sprint work, especially for our position guys throughout the week. So what I'll normally do is I'll sprint them on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and obviously Tuesday midweek schedule. Usually that's going to be either pregame or during the warm up. So like obviously we'll hit our full dynamic warm up, our mobility, and then on the back end, some of our starters will hit them with like 1 to 2 sprints. I'll bring out the resistance bands as well, and I'll have all of our guys hit 1 to 2 10-yard resisted sprints with a partner, and usually we'll do that pregame as well. And then from there, obviously, our guys who aren't seeing a lot of playing time, not a lot of innings, I'll usually increase that volume a little bit more. Like usually how our games are, and obviously any baseball, strength coaches in here who've been in the games know it's like usually we'll run, we'll meet up as a team, and then after they're finished up meeting as a team, I'll take those couple of guys and I'll have them hit 2 or 3 more sprints. If that makes sense, Tristan. But I think for our position guys, that's the easiest way. Like I like to dose that sprint work in, obviously on their high days where like they're already getting moving. Like I think on the normal practice days and anything like that, I think it just takes too much time. And I kind of want them obviously to reduce the volume throughout the week. So we kind of had a basic dynamic through our performance prep and then go straight in the lift. Our pitchers are a little different. So our starters will hit their sprint 2 days after. So like let's say Friday night guy will throw. He'll sprint on Sunday. So Saturday will be a full restoration day, a little bit of aerobic activity, and then that Sunday time will be more of like their high CNS lift, and I'll sprint the pitchers then. Our bullpen guys, I'll try and microdose it in very similar to how I do the position guys. Like their warm up is built in sprints. So I actually have them hit a 95%, 90% sprint. Nothing super crazy, nothing on timing gates. I just think personally pulling out timing gates in season, like I think there's just too much room for things to happen. And honestly, man, if you're getting a 95% sprint at least, 6 times during the week, I'd say you're in a pretty good spot. When it comes to the plyometrics, like Andrew said, I've kind of fit a little bit of extensive plyos into our warm up. So it's not your typical plyos. Like we'll do like split exchange or we'll do some basic like hops, but nothing crazy. And then a lot of our intensive plyos are going to be found in our workout, on the jump mat and in other variations, obviously throughout the workout. So nothing super crazy on the plyometric front. We still touch that basic volume like every day during practice in the warm up, but it's not enough to, obviously, they get a ton of contacts when you're in season, but those contacts they get in the warm up for 5 yards or 10 yards is not enough, I think, to break the boat.
I'll piggyback what they said about the extensive plyos in the season. They're getting enough ground contacts from the game. My plyos and or my really they're not actual plyos I would call them because they're really jumps. They're longer ground contact jumps that I'm utilizing more to drive more, power through contractile muscle fiber, because there are a lot of high speed impacts already occurring. Um, that's kind of not the same approach I take in the fall season. When we're in our practice season, I really have no choice but to try to develop some more reactivity and elastic qualities. Because we're in season all year long. I would just rather do it during the fall, even though they're still on the field and getting the high speed stuff. Um, because like there's a lot less stress in the fall. Um, because there's no games, there's no traveling as well. With the sprinting in season, I find it actually pretty logistically difficult to sprint my athletes and actually get times on them every single week. We'll have midweek games on Tuesday or Wednesday, and then we'll play a conference series Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So if I'm going to hit them with max velocity, it's either going to be before that midweek game. If we don't have that midweek game, maybe I will time them early in the week. And then I'll try to get them another exposure before the games on Friday. Just 1 to 2 reps out to at least 90% effort. So a lot of the research around hamstring injury actually says that you need to hit just 90%. You don't really have to hit a true 100. As long as I feel like they're getting close to max, I'm good with that. When I was with Kansas City, we did have GPS. And the only guys that hit max speed on the field were our burners, like our guys that really ran fast. Everybody else, you never saw max velocity exposure in the game unless they were really chasing down a ball deep in the gap. That has a lot to do with where they're positioned on the field. Like, let's say you're playing a guy far off the line and a ball gets hit down the line that you don't expect. Only then would you see a true max velocity exposure, maybe. But it was actually like rare in game at the professional level. But in the collegiate level, you do see more max velocity exposures on GPS from what I've heard from people, and I think that's just because the game's a little faster. Like guys at the pro level, I feel like are not exhibiting as high of speed outputs as a lot of collegiate guys. To many people's surprise, actually. What rabbit holes have we been getting down lately? Oh man.
Tyler, I love this question.
Oh, I've
Uh,
been getting. Well, I mean, previously I was getting into the wide versus narrow infrasternal angle stuff and the pelvic orientations and things like that. And I was listening to a lot of Zach Couples talks and a lot of Bill Hartman stuff and PRI things. And the physical therapists are on one side of the spectrum where they're talking about breathing exercises and doing all these drills that we don't have time for. And what I resorted to was finding just the right exercise for people based on their orientation. So if I could give you a really brief synopsis of something that you could take away right now, a lot of narrow athletes who are lanky and kind of built like a cylinder, like a string bean, you're going to have you can either have a narrow that has a very flat back, so they have a posterior tilt orientation. They look very slender, like they walk around like Slender Man. And then you've got another orientation like a Usain Bolt or like a Tyson Gay or any kind of fast athlete who has like an anterior tilt orientation. The reason they have that anterior tilt is because they that allows them to create a lot of internal rotation, which is what you're going to push through when you're running specifically and when you're producing force. Every time an athlete produces force, there's some level of internal rotation and compression happening up the system. So I was racking my brain why a lot of my flat back athletes were having like sacroiliac discomfort and some minor back flare-ups after RDLs. And I think a lot of people would write it off as, oh, it's just part of the training process, but I could kind of make the assumption now and the educated inference now that I think it's because when you're in that posterior tilt orientation, it's really hard to move your sacrum forward and actually create an anterior tilt, which you need to lengthen the hamstrings and sit back in an RDL. So a lot of my flat back athletes, I'll have them do concentric only glute work like glute ham or I'm sorry, not glute ham raises, single leg landmine hip thrusts, bilateral hip thrusts, split stance RDLs. That's going to help create a little more motion in their pelvis. And then a lot of the anterior tilted athletes, they can handle the bilateral hinging pretty well. I'll take that one step further. A lot of the flat back athletes squat really, really well. And the reason for that is because when your pelvis is dumped back, your hip joints are retroverted, which gives your hips more external rotation space. And I've noticed the opposite for the anterior tilted athletes. They do really well with trap bar deadlifting, but they don't squat well. And I'm one of those athletes that has that forward tilt. If you ever see me squatting on Instagram, I always need a heel wedge. I can't squat without a heel wedge because if I do, my butt's going to dump back. And the reason you see that butt wink, it's not always a hip mobility problem. It could be a pelvic orientation problem. And your pelvis wants to dump this way back to give your hips more space to get into external rotation. So, um, yeah, that's a very 10,000 foot view of that whole model.
I've been
Hey,
go
sorry,
ahead,
sorry,
Hunt.
Andrew.
No,
I,
no,
I
go
was
ahead,
gonna,
Hunt.
I was just gonna say I'll let you go, but Joe, there was a podcast that Bill Hartman did with Just Fly like a couple weeks ago. That was really good. I was actually listening to it on my drive up here back home. But basically, everything that he was talking about right there is he touches on a little bit in that podcast. So if you're looking to dive in more, that's a great starting point, at least for me too. Where that's another rabbit hole I've been diving into. But Andrew, I'll let you go.
I've been getting into a lot of I just listened to a bunch of podcasts on, for one, Corey Schlesinger. He's with the Detroit Pistons right now on exploring athleticism and progressing plyometrics and getting into position specific isometrics. He talked about it in terms of basketball. Another thing, I know there was a question about it later on, but about microdosing. He's a big microdosing coach that he does that a lot with his athletes. Number one, thinking about how to maybe include that in a baseball setting of the microdosed approach in terms of the weight room, in terms of having 15 to 20-minute sessions and spacing them out for 4 to 5 days at a time. That's one thing I'm going down a rabbit hole of. And then number two is creating position specific isometrics within the game of baseball. Obviously, positions and reverse engineering the sport from basketball to baseball is going to be different, but positionally, how to mimic position specific ISOs so that baseball players can be and softball players alike can be best prepared for the demands of that game is something that I'm going down the rabbit hole of. And then how to get more specialized in terms of change of direction, progressing it from ISO to more dynamic based movements, how to progress that in terms of our change of direction work, in terms of our sprint work, in terms of competing, to make it a competitive environment, how to fit that in within my model as we progress, especially more towards the in-season period. You go from general to specific. We're starting to approach a more specific type program. How do we fit that in as we approach the season? And like I said, more so microdosing the weight room. Is it 2 lifts a week for 45 minutes, or is it 4 lifts a week for 15 to 20 minutes? And it's something I'm still trying to mull over, but a lot of my continuing education right now is pushing me towards those thoughts of how to make the in-season model better. Because the fall period for programming baseball, softball, it's the map is written. At least for me, it's the high days are going to be high, the low days are going to be low. But the in-season period, when you're traveling, you might be going to, I know we always play a tournament at the very beginning of our season. Last year we were in Puerto Rico, the year before we were in Florida, and you're gone for a whole week. How do you make that work? Do you microdose it? Do you have a big session? Sometimes when you're on the road, you might be home for one day in a whole week. And so you have to make sure you get one big lift in. So you might not be microdosing that lift, and just trying to figure out how to fit that within the model I'm trying to produce.
I guess that leads us pretty well into the next question.
And go ahead.
Ronnie's asking about microdosing here. Hunter, you can offer your thoughts in a second after I read this if I cut you off. But
No, you're good, man.
what are your opinions on microdosing for baseball in season at the college level? Hunter, you can give your thoughts, and then I've got some thoughts with that microdosing too. And then Andrew, I'm sure you're going to want to contribute there as well to that question.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, we microdose a little bit. I said in our speed work, obviously, I think is huge, especially like with such a competitive environment. I mean, when you look at our schedule, we're going to have a couple weeks where we play 2 midweeks. So at the end of the day, you got to figure out a great time to be able to do that. I know Andrew could talk on this a little bit more, but I know when we were at Elon, we had a couple two-way guys that we would microdose, and I know Andrew also had couple more two-way guys at Virginia that he microdosed as well, just because of the demands of bullpens and obviously playing the field as well is just super stressful. So I'm honestly going to defer that question to Andrew because I know that that's something that he's dove into more of that I haven't necessarily dove into with my athletes, and I don't really have a lot of two-way guys at the mid-major level,
Yeah,
at least in my stage.
man, I'll tell you what, the biggest challenge of my 2 years previously at Virginia, and even at Elon too, was how to manage two ways. And two ways are a beast. Two ways are a beast in and of itself because you're, at least in up at our stadium, everyone is trying to get a piece of you when you're a two-way. The pitching coach wants you to do everything pitching. The hitting coach wants you to do everything hitting. I selfishly want you to do everything strength and conditioning wise, sports performance wise. All these pieces are pulling the athlete. And it's our job as, your ego is like, I want you to do everything. But as I'm going to steal a quote here, we're not sports performance coaches, we're stress managers. That's Zach Dakant said that was the first one to say that. We're stress managers. And that's the first thing that comes to mind when I think of two ways, managing two ways. You have a pitching schedule, a full throwing program, hitting and fielding. And there's 90% of college baseball players devote their lives to one or the other. And so, how do we manage that? Oftentimes, I am microdosing, like Hunter talked about. I'm microdosing 20-minute sessions. We had a two-way last year who started at first base, started on the weekends for us, and hit in a three hole. And so that's not common in college baseball. And so I would take him after games, I would take him after practices, and I would lift him for 15, 20 minutes at a time. And we would just get small sessions because at the end of the day, I need him to be available to play first base in the weekday and pitch for us on the weekends while also feeling fresh to run the bases and play the field. And so 15 to 20-minute sessions, you tried to line up. I mean, let's be real. I'm going to call a spade a spade. It's really hard in season to match up high days and low days. You can talk about it all you want, and you can say, hey, we're going to match up the high days and low days, which is a great goal and objective to have, but it doesn't often happen in season, especially for a two-way. And so we would do one block. I mean, one block. I'm talking about we would split squat on one day. I would dumbbell bench him on another. We would trap bar on the day before he was going to start. I would trap bar. This was all based around his throwing program, by the way. His lifts were based around his throwing program. That's the most important for me. Position players, you can lift a position guy. It's more malleable. A pitcher, you want to stick to your routine. You want to stick to your schedule. I lifted him around his throwing schedule, but also took into account, hey, he's playing 9 innings at first tomorrow. So we split squatted him, we trap barred him, we bench pressed him, and then we chin upped him. And those were his 4 days. And he was doing low volume, high intensity, and he would maybe do one accessory with it. And I felt comfortable enough with that over the course of the entire season. If you're stacking sessions, I mean, 2 sessions a week for 24 weeks, that's 48 sessions. You're telling me he's not going to get stronger stacking 48 sessions on top of one another? So that was one of the microdosed approaches that I did.
I think the biggest problem for me with microdosing is just it's logistically impossible to get my athletes in as frequently as I want. With baseball, I feel like it's a little easier. Um, our weight room is also not attached to our softball field, so that causes a problem in itself. If I had the ability, I would love to be doing 3 to 4 sessions a week that are shorter. And the way that I break this down, I spoke about this in my course. You have your frequency programs, and then you have what are called saturated programs. So a block program is what you would call very dense and very saturated, where you're focusing on one quality numerous times a week and very high frequencies and high intensities and volumes. Then you have your frequency model, which is things are more spread out. You're doing less every single day, and the negative ramifications of every single training session are reduced. So when you have a very saturated day with a lot going on that takes an hour, the fatigue that you're going to get from that is going to largely supersede what would occur if you just did a 20-minute session and then you just stacked back-to-back days like that. Um, I think that would be ideal. Um, yeah, I think Andrew hit the nail on the head with that.
I'll go a little bit deeper just because I'm listening to podcasts about it. Like, this is not feasible for a lot of coaches, myself included. But like, I mean, the microdose approach, like there's coaches that are microdosing sessions before and after the game. And so that's 2 sessions in one day, and if that doesn't fit for a lot of situations, I understand that, but like that's what that's what's taking up a lot of thought in my brain right now is how can you apply that in our setting? And like Joe said, a lot of places don't have weight rooms right attached to their stadium. And so how do you make it work? What's logistically, how is that something that you can make work? At the high school level, it's it's doing a lot with a kettlebell. Like there's a lot you can do with a kettlebell. There's a lot you can do with bands. There's sprint work that you can do. There's, intensive jumps that you can do to make sure you're still doing stuff over the course of a season.
There was actually a question that came in our Discord from one of our members that I'm going to ask here. Really quick, he said, let's see here. What are your thoughts on overhead pressing for baseball, softball athletes? I'm for it because I think stabilizing dynamic objects overhead is key to healthy shoulders. However, I can see the innate risks with the movements. If I had a Viking attachment to a landmine, I would be humming that all day long. I do think vertical pressing is important. The other thing I'm wondering about, I have a lack of frontal plane movements aside from med ball throws. I understand that baseball is a frontal transverse plane sport. However, I'm more on the side that power isn't necessarily plane specific. So we have two issues here. Overhead pressing. What are your guys' thoughts on that? And then we can talk about whether power is plane specific. I think that's a very deep subject that has a lot of semantics surrounding it, and a lot of vocabulary and language battles going on there that I think people don't really understand what other people are saying when they talk about that. But let's just stick with the first one. Overhead pressing, how do you guys go about that?
Man, I'll tell you this. Our guys this year, the one thing I changed this year is we do a lot more overhead pressing, and I'm not just talking about landmines. Like we do a lot of Z pressing. We do a good bit of like Arnold pressing. I've even had some guys do push pressing as well. I think for me, like the more that I dive down the rabbit hole and the more that I look at baseball athletes and the stressor that the arm is under, the stressor that the athlete's under, like I think the demonization, kind of very similar to the demonization of the bench press, I think is has been something that I've seen. Obviously, you have to dose your shoulder work right. But I mean, when you look at the stressors that the arm is put under, I think there are a lot of people that focus on the stability aspect, but you can't necessarily have output and stability, I think, within the same sentence. I think you have to understand that as you decrease or well, you increase the need for stability, I think your output goes down. So for me personally, when it comes to trying to dose them with the highest intensity stressor I can within that controlled environment, I'm trying to give them that stressor and honestly just trying to build robustness and resilience like around that. Not really much there in terms of like obviously I get the need of and the concern of it, but that's kind of been my thought process behind it. Nothing really fancy or crazy behind it. Just the fact that and I'll tell you this, we've had no issues, we've had no impingements, nothing, and actually our guys really like him. It was a hard adjustment for these guys to do, and when I first showed them the movements, they kind of looked at me a little funny. But the more we did it, the more the guys actually benefited and liked from it. So I think it's just one of those things that gets a bad rap, and I think that obviously if you dose it in properly and you start like on the lower end and obviously work your way back up and dose the tolerance correctly, I think you'll be in a fine spot. Andrew, Joe, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I mean I did a post last week on gymnastics specifically. We're actually going to have a pretty cool email coming out that Hunter's going to write on gymnastics. But if you just think about like all of the degrees of freedom that your shoulder's capable of, and then how many of those degrees of freedom and how many patterns you're covering with the upper body exercises that you're looking at a very small percentage. And when I think about how many degrees of freedom and the range of motion the shoulder is going through when an athlete is throwing, I think we're really selling athletes short when we don't explore all the patterns the shoulder is capable of. So that's why I like handstand variations. We had a Discord member the other day sending videos in a thread we have on like vestibular games and gymnastics games and things like that. He was having his athletes doing wheelbarrows, so like athletes in a push-up position, but their partners holding their legs up and they're walking across the ground. So things like that. I mean, when dosed appropriately and also progressed appropriately, you obviously have to keep in mind progression here. I think it's an extremely powerful tool. Um, I'm obviously going off on a tangent with gymnastics, but the same thing applies. Um, I think it's definitely an area that is being more broadly considered in throwing athletes, which I really like. And I also really like the things that are coming out of the javelin um, scope, the javelin space with baseball athletes. I think those are really good things as well. The back bridges, a lot of the really deep, disadvantageous positions that javelin coaches are putting their athletes in. I think that's what rotational power, if we can segue into that really quick, comes down to as well is being comfortable in end ranges is I think is a big thing with rotational power because if you can't handle separation and if you don't know where your body's at and if you can't control that at slow speeds, there's no way that you're going to be able to segment it at high speeds. So I really like a lot of the things I'm seeing coming out of the javelin space. Um, namely getting into disadvantageous positions that are really uncomfortable and getting comfortable there. So, Andrew, you can take the
Yeah,
floor here.
I one thing I really appreciate um, about these two coaches is that they're not afraid to be outside of the box, and it helps me grow selfishly. And I go back and forth about the overhead pressing, and you start to hear why coaches do it, and it's like, man, it makes so much sense. Like it's not like, do you know how many pounds of force are on your shoulder and elbow when you throw a baseball? And we're talking about a slow overhead press. They're not even comparable. And so it's one of those things that's like if you coach it effectively, if you progress it the right way, your body doesn't your body doesn't know overhead pressing. Like it understands load. So if you progress something correctly, you're going to be fine to do any movement in the weight room. When we talk about end range movements, I have started to dive deep down end range holds. Like where a lot of injuries happen is during transition periods, especially in throwing a baseball, going from external to internal, that transition period. If you can control your body in end ranges of motion and establish a lot of control in that motion, you're bulletproofing the athlete, for the better in a lot of that stuff. And so end range push-ups, like Hunter does a lot of handstand walks. Like that's when you expose the body to those types of isometrics and holds, you're doing a lot of good for the athlete, and I'm all for it. That's end range positions are, and that's again like we can talk about position specific isos. That's something that I find really fascinating, and it's something that is becoming more popular within the field of performance.
I think one thing with the rotational power piece too is I think the wrong question is being asked. I think we're looking at it from a lens of a physical quality when it really should be looked at from the lens of a skill. Like I really don't think that it has anything to do with contractile muscular power. And it has everything to do with sequencing and energy transduction up the body. I think that's what it has to do with. So when people ask me like, why are you throwing med balls if you don't believe that power is plane specific? My response is, well, I'm teaching a feel-oriented pattern. You could use med balls or tidal tanks. Hunter, I know you're big on tidal tanks and those things. You can use those to teach a lot of things. Where your body should be placed, where your weight distribution should be, the timing of your sequencing, and also the tidal tanks are pretty underrated because you're adding a lot of minor perturbations to your movement, which are going to aid in motor learning. So you're basically amplifying the error. That's a very important term and concept in motor learning is error amplification. There's actually a lot of studies out there, and Rob Gray talks about this in his How We Learn to Move book. I got it right here in my library. How We Learn to Move. He talks about error amplification. There he goes. There he goes. He's got it too. Um, Basically, they did a study on golfers, and they were telling golfers who had a similar issue. They told one group how to do it the right way, quote unquote, and they told the other group to do what they were doing wrong, even worse. Okay, so imagine telling a pitcher who's overstriding, "Hey, I want you to overstride even more." The data suggests that you telling the athlete to make their error worse or do the thing that they're doing wrong even worse than they already are, that athlete's going to have the better result long term. So that's a very interesting thing that I think people don't really think about with water bags and little perturbation tools like that, which I would consider med balls a perturbation tool because you're taking a very specific pattern and you're doing it in a slightly different way. Um, I think that would, in theory, support your motor learning and your skill acquisition on the mound. Okay, next question here. What metrics do you trust the most when deciding daily readiness or modifying loads? I'm gonna start here because I really love this subject of auto regulation. So I don't necessarily use specific metrics on a given day because first of all, if I were to do that, I would have to have enough time to get athletes warm enough to produce an output on a force plate or something like that to where I could make an accurate judgment of where they're at. My warm-ups are 5 minutes long. No, I'm not even kidding. Sometimes they're 3 minutes long. And I have to get athletes moving. That's why I have them come in early and kind of get their own prep work done before I start, but I'm very limited on time. So I don't have enough time to test them and assess what they're going to be able to do before I actually get them into the session and we actually start training. So all of my sessions are auto-regulated using two different metrics at the same time. I use reps in reserve and I also use velocity-based training. So not everyone has those tools. If you don't have those tools, there is a really good presentation I posted in the community the other day. It's an hour long talking about how to modulate intensity if you don't have these tools, okay? So you could have percentage ranges, you could have RIR ranges, but pretty much RIR is a subjective measure, right? I'm going to perform reps until I feel like I've got 2 reps left in the tank. Now, let's say I have a day where we're doing 4 sets of 3 with 1 RIR, okay? 3 reps with 1 RIR is approximately 89%. Okay, so if I see an athlete doing 3 reps with 1 RIR, um, and let's say I have their 1 RM. Let's say their 1 RM is 315, whatever. And 89% of that, let's just do some quick math really quick so I can talk accurately here. 89% of 315 is 280. So if they're doing 280, that means they're pretty much on that mark. Like they're where I want them to be for that day. If they were able to do 3 reps and still feel like they could do one more, that means that they were around 280 pounds. Okay, but if I see that they only did 265, that means that they're 89%. If I do 265 divided by 315, their 89% that day was really their 76%. So their 76% felt like 89. So reps in reserve takes care of a little bit of that auto regulation. If you have that built in, you're always going to add a layer of subjectivity in there and allow them to train at a level that's commensurate with their readiness. So you don't need a test. You could just go off performance on that right there. And you might even find the opposite. Maybe they're lifting 295 for 3 reps with 1 rep left in the tank. Now their 89% feels like they're 90, they're 95%, okay? Or they're 93%, whatever that would come out to, okay? With the velocities, you could use that in tandem with RIR. So let's say that I'm performing reps and I want to get down to 1 RIR. If I'm squatting, that if I perform a rep at like, 0.55, zero point 0.5, as I do more reps, I'm going to get slower. I'm eventually going to fall down to like zero point 0.4. Okay, a lot of the research that looks at what's called minimal voluntary threshold, if you don't know what that is, I would look into it. That's the weight you lift your 1 RM at. So for back squat, it's approximately zero point 0.3 meters per second. So if I see an athlete that is lifting at a speed of 0.55 or zero point 0.6, I know for a fact that they have more reps left in the tank because they're nowhere near that minimal voluntary threshold. Does that make sense? So if I say to you, let's say I'm coaching you guys and I'm like, hey guys, we're going to go until we have 2 RIR. If you're finishing your set at 0.55 or zero point 0.7 and you say, that felt really hard, I only had 2 reps left, there's no way, no freaking way. You're not working hard enough. So you could use velocity as well at the same time. If you wanted to use velocity alone, you could have your speed cutoffs. Hey, I want you to pick a load today that you can lift at zero point 0.6 meters per second. And you're going to stay above that, and then you're just going to change your weight based off that. Okay. If someone's really, really sore and really beat up, you'd want to stay above, like at higher velocities. I would say no lower than zero point 0.6, because then you're going to get into territory where you're straining and you're spending a lot of time under tension there. Or if it's the day before a game, that's a really good opportunity to do higher speeds as well, because you're not gonna have as much fatigue in those ranges. So I will still do force play testing. That will kind of dictate how I program in the future, and how I'll approach the coming days. And it will also give me feedback on like, okay, how are the athletes responding to the load and volume that I'm administering right now? So I use the testing more for chronic changes in the program, not so much for that day. And this is a trap that people fall into. And I know I'm speaking long here, but this is the most important thing that I'm going to say here. The more you change your program based on a couple numbers, the more variability you're going to have in your program and the less bias you're going to have. And the more ups and downs you have, the more you're going to crush athletes. You're going to think you're helping them, but if you do 2 days that are super, super light Then you have the weekend comes around, and then you come back and you try to hit them hard again. That hard session is going to hit them like a ton of bricks because you've desensitized them to intensity. So training through a little bit of fatigue is actually a good thing. It's going to keep acute workload and capacity to handle stress high. But I'll just stop with that.
No, Joe's spot on that. I mean, especially when you're looking at in-season training and you're looking at planning your residuals throughout the season, like there are going to come times where sometimes we have to push. And I tell our athletes that, like, I don't want to be the bad guy for our athletes, but like I'll tell them like, hey, we're coming up on a week right now where obviously we're in a middle ground, but looking ahead for the future, we need to touch something a little bit heavier. I'm going to tell them that hey, we need to push a little bit. Now that's probably going to be with the minimal viable volume. I think that me and Andrew do something really well. Something I think we took from Zach, but within our workouts, we'll actually have different numbers of sets based on how the athlete is feeling for that day. So we'll have like the minimal viable sets in there, which is like, if you feel like garbage, hit me 3 sets. If you feel great, hit me 6 sets, right? If you're somewhere in the middle, like you can honestly think of it as like a red light, green light, yellow light system, and then you kind of go from there. So I think that's a great way to look at it in season, especially if you're partnering with RIR or velocity, because if you have an athlete that comes in and they say they feel like garbage and they do the 3 sets and they're still not within that threshold of that 85% you're looking for that strength residual week, then at that point it's coming up to them and saying, hey, look, like you're still not hitting what I want to. I want you to take that next set or the other 2 sets to be able to find that range there. Um, Continuing off with like I mean, again, I'm a mid major, so I don't have force plates. I'm getting force plates, but I don't have them. So in the past, what I've done is I've actually done a wellness questionnaire. I don't take it to be absolute truth, but it's something that I get added in, and I get it. It's a lot of data, but it's just another like a point for me to see kind of how the athletes are feeling coming into the session. So it's a quick questionnaire on a Google form they fill out as soon as they come in. It'll usually be like the date, their body weight, how many hours they slept last night, how they feel on a scale of 1 to 10. And then I have that conditional formatted within a sheet that tells me based on the red light, green light system, like if they're within a specific number, it'll be green, yellow, or red. And I'll kind of do that for meals they ate and stuff like that. And eventually you can start to see trends on that and obviously see how that relates to their performance. Because like Joe said, like if I have a kid who comes in and he says he feels like a 1 and he slept 3 hours last night, but he comes in and he's having the best day he absolutely has on the velocity unit when it comes to doing a split squat, then at the end of the day, it's like, hey, buddy, we still got more in the tank. So I think being able to take as much useful data as you can, being able to compare it obviously to the more accurate data like the VBT units or the RIR, I think is the best case there. But yeah, a lot of times in season, I think the big thing we're combating is guys pushing themselves. Like, I get it, they want to be fresh for games, but a lot of the times, and Andrew can maybe touch on this more, but a lot of it for me is trying to have these athletes understand that they have more in the tank than what they think they do. So I don't know if that helped there, but I really like the questionnaires. Our coaches like the questionnaires. My head coach always asks me what they say, what they look like, how are the lifts, because we lift before practice most days. So that's kind of a big touching point for me and our coaching staff to kind of see like how our guys are feeling as they transition to the field, and they can make adjustments based on practice. So that's kind of a small nod to the skill aspect that we talked about at the beginning. But yeah.
Yeah, I won't go too much in the weeds because we already talked a lot about this question, but and I want to get to some other questions too. But I think in terms of readiness, like again, Catapult's awesome. If you don't have Catapult, here's a really easy way to track readiness. And is you can Joe talked a lot about RIR. There's also RPE, rate of perceived exertion. And so what you can do is you can ask athletes at the end of practice, RPE, um, and you can multiply that by the amount of minutes the practice was, and that can give you an arbitrary number. And that arbitrary number can serve for workload purposes over the course of time. We use VBT to track readiness and measure our intensities. But at the end of the day, for high school coaches, for people that don't have the tech, that's an easy way to track readiness is multiplying RPE. Let's say, hey, I asked Joe how hard that practice was. He gives me a 7. Practice was 2 hours. I multiply 7 by 120 minutes. There's your arbitrary number that you can track over the course of time to give you an indication of workloads to give you an indication of intensities. Um, we also have questionnaires that we'll give guys. We have an app called Track. It's through Driveline that we'll give guys it gives them freedom to talk about, what's going on in their school life, um, their social life, their baseball life, and it kind of gives us an insight. And so if there's something that we need to flag, it starts conversation, but it also gives us an inside look on how we need to go about treating that athlete the next session or the next practice. Um, I'll answer this question quickly and from Anthony, and then Hunt and Joe, you guys can tack along here. The weight room I work in, we only have 5 med balls. I would like to use those for rotational power. However, in a team setting, that might be difficult. So, what are some other ways to train rotation? We hit a lot of anti-rotational stuff. I have 2 thoughts. Number one, cables are a great way to train rotation. Doing rotational work with a cable. Anchors are awesome. We have anchors at our facility. We do a ton of um, work with the anchor where I'll tell them to do fast rotations, as many as you can for 3 seconds on both sides. The other thing I can suggest, Anthony, in terms of efficiency and having 5 med balls, I worked at the Division 2 level for 2 years, and I got really good at using what you had in terms of resources. In terms of programming and logistics, like let's talk about that real quick. Logistically, you have 5 med balls. You have 40 guys on a team. What you can do is say, hey, we're going to have block A and block B. Whenever you can, throughout block A and block B, just get 2 sets of 3 med ball throws throughout. That way, you're not going to have a clog up with 30 guys trying to get 5 med balls. Instead, logistically, you can just say, hey, in your first 2 blocks, obviously you don't want to try and do an explosive med ball throw at the end of a session, but your first 15 minutes of the lift, let's get two sets or 3 sets of 2 on a rotational med ball toss. That's a really easy way to use limited resources with a big group. I'll give the force plate for an example. We have one force plate, as most schools do. I just want 1 or 2 jumps in the first block. I don't care if you get it in the second set, the fourth set, the fifth set, whatever it is, right? Um, I'm just trying to get a jump. I've used my mentor when I was at the Division 2 level. We had one GHD, one glute back extension. He said, hey, whenever you can, just get 1 set of 20 reps in on the back extension throughout the entire session. And so that's a really easy way to work with limited resources.
I
Yeah,
was
I'll
gonna say,
say when it comes. Oh,
good,
go ahead,
good.
Joe.
I was just gonna say you need to go to Lowe's and buy some cheap PVC pipes and swing
I
those.
was about to say the same thing. I was about to say the same thing. Yep. Yep. Dude, I love PVC pipe swings. I mean, granted, dude, I had a kid last year who you got to tell the kid to obviously get some, like, either get some hockey tape or get some lizard skin or whatever. Because I had a kid throw one on the roof of our weight room. So you got to make sure that they have a good grip on it because I like it. But no, PVC pipes are great. And I think you'll be able to swing a skinny PVC pipe a lot faster than like 4 pound med ball, unless you have a 2. But I think it's a great way for our guys, and we hit that usually during the preseason, which I really like. And our hitting coach has seen them as well, and he loves them, and we include them a lot within like our pre-hit stuff. So I think that's the easiest way to do that when it comes to your med ball throws.
Hunter, wasn't it you that was talking to me a couple months back about overspeed rotation training and thinking that like PVC pipes can be an overspeed stimulus because of the obviously they're a lot lighter than a med ball
Yeah,
and also a bat.
yeah, no, I'm gonna write a post. I have already an email written for this summit, but about rotation, where it's like staying away from the middle ground. I think, and I don't know. I go back and forth on this. Like, I don't think a med ball. Like, I think the feel thing of a med ball, like being able to cue up the feel thing, and also if you're looking for other qualities for med ball throws, like whether that maybe you're looking for more like velocity or you're looking for more like variation in it, I think is good to use, but. we use a lot of PVC pipe rotations like to touch that high velocity end of the spectrum. Like I think when you stay away from the middle ground, and for some of our rotation work, like we'll have a heavy chop or a heavy rotation or a heavy side bend or something along the lines to just train the entire trunk and trains the entire phase of rotation. Like I think is big, but on the opposite end, I think you need something lighter to be able to train that maximal velocity rotation. And I mean, you see that in driveline, like Tyler is here or was here, but at driveline, I mean, you see the weighted bat training, underloaded and overloaded. I mean, looking at bat speed, and there's actually a company out there called Stack, which I've been following for a little bit, where like it actually tracks bat speed, and you could put different weight implements on it, which I think is super sick. And I'm actually gonna try and dive more down that rabbit hole. But yeah, I think there's a lot of validity to it, and I think Charlie Francis, obviously within his format, I think obviously staying like away from that middle ground and sprinting, I think also has a purpose and premise as well with rotation.
Any good resources or places to start when learning about impulse type training? Been seeing it a lot. Think there's something to it, but want to dig in to understand it. So I'll tell you firsthand, we have Jared Slater, who's a member of our community, who also presented on it. He did a presentation on not on impulses, but on like brain imbalances. It was a very deep presentation, but he gets into the weeds as to why impulses and like fast stretching and drop catches are important. I also think that the Gap podcast with Hitman Performance, and I think his name is Dan. He's who's also a javelin coach. They just had Dak Performance on there. I would listen to that. And I also think that they had another guy in there who his name is Neurological Fitness, I think, on Instagram. I don't know the guy's actual name though, but I would start with those. Originally, when this stuff was making its rounds on Instagram, a lot of people were saying this is for tendon stiffness. I reject that because tendon needs to be actually loaded for a long duration to like actually respond and get stiffer. What I think is happening with an impulse is you are what Jared said is that you're bringing literal charge to the muscle and you're increasing its tone. Or I'm sorry, you're decreasing its tone. You would be so if I do a hamstring impulse, let's say my hamstrings are super tight, like chronically, and I do a end range hamstring impulse. I had a video of this on my Instagram. You might have seen it. Liam, just nod your head if you saw that video of me doing that on Instagram. Yeah. So ever since I started cycling those in, I can tell you anecdotally, I don't feel any kind of hamstring soreness anymore or tightness or like inhibition. I've hit my fastest sprints I've ever hit since then. Like there was some kind of neurological guarding going on with that tissue. I've also had athletes who have really overactive pecs and bicep pain when throwing, and I've given them a lot of long duration ISOs for their rotator cuff and their rhomboids and their lats to kind of bring more tone to their backside and get the front side to relax. And I've actually gotten some good feedback with that too. But what Jared was saying is that a hypertonicity situation in a muscle needs fast stretch. So drop catches, fast stretches, impulses, things like that. That's what he was saying are beneficial for those issues. Um, but I'm still diving into it. I've been sidetracked with a lot of different projects lately. I had been going down that rabbit hole and I got sidetracked from it. But I don't know what these guys' thoughts are with them.
Yeah, I dove into it a little bit, Liam. I think last in season. I mean, I think I was not introduced to the topic, but I read a little bit more. There's the best sports training book ever by DB Hammer. If you can get your hands on that, that's kind of a relic, a missing relic in this field. Like I have the book, Liam, so if you need it, I can send it to you. But that
Hunter,
was the first sports.
I need it. I
I'll
can't
send it
find it
to you.
anywhere.
I'll send it
I
to you.
can't find it
That
anywhere.
book. I want you to know how hard I tried to look for this book. Like for a 3 month stretch, I felt like Indiana Jones hunting through like all these different Google forms trying to find this book. Like I was on a mission and I found it. I'll send it to you, Joe. But he talks a lot in there, and I haven't finished the book. I started it and I got sidetracked, but there's a lot of mention there. I know Workhorse Training, I think on Instagram is his name. He does a lot of impulse training as well. Um, he's a fellow oh crap, triphasic training. I'm blanking on his name. Yeah, but he posts a
Cal
lot of good
Dietz.
stuff there. Yeah, Cal Dietz. Yeah, Cal Dietz. He's a fellow Cal Dietz guy up in Minnesota, and he posts a lot of stuff on impulse training. So I would start there. Again, like Joe said, I'm still diving into it, and frankly, I got to go back and finish reading that book. Like that book, just to say, that book is like it's crazy. Like there's so much like jargon and terminology in there that isn't like like it is his own jargon. So like you're gonna have to go through and like I translated it. So I made a Google Doc and I took everything, every definition he had at the beginning of the book for like eccentrics. He calls eccentrics something completely different. It's super weird. I don't know. You'll see it when I send it to you guys. But yeah, so that's my thought on it. Again, I haven't done enough on it, and I've slowly dove into it, but I had other things pop up and other rabbit holes I was diving into.
In regards to BFR, how often do you use this tool, and is it really as productive as most say? The field is pretty saturated at this point, which, oh, we have multiple questions here. All right, let's start with BFR. Not me specifically, but we as a staff, when I was with Kansas City, used it with guys who were post surgery who couldn't really load right away. Um, I don't see myself ever using it, just because we're always in season and you're obviously going to get a lot of metabolic fatigue. I don't think I would use it personally ever, but in a rehab setting, I find it very, very beneficial, especially when you have a tissue that's been operated on or a limb that's been operated on. You're definitely going to have some muscle wasting, and you can signal for some really good hypertrophy benefits without a lot of load just through the accumulation of metabolic byproducts that BFR is going to give you. So it's a good replacement, for the time being, for actual mechanical tension and load when you're unable to do that.
We
Yeah.
we've used
Sorry, go
it.
ahead, Andrew.
We've used it. I've seen it done in more so a rehab setting than a performance standpoint. We've used it for return to play athletes with ACL, with different lower extremity ailments. We've used it in a rehab setting, not so much on the performance side, but I've it's really good for beginning stages of rehab. And like I said, we haven't really used it much in a performance setting.
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, it's very. My thought process is very similar to Joe and Andrew, so I'm not going to go on that additional rant. But yeah, our ATs use it a lot. I've never used it. Like that's usually out of my scope of practice. Like everywhere I've been, like we don't handle that. That's usually our athletic training staff that takes care of that. But I do really like it, obviously within that rehab setting. So
The field is pretty
The field is
saturated.
pretty
Yeah.
saturated.
I would say so he's saying what makes the difference between great, good, and piss poor coaches? Why don't we go around and each give three things? I'm gonna say I'm gonna say your image is extremely important. Like what is the first impression you're gonna give your coaching staff? Like if you work with a team, you could destroy your respect and trust very early. And you could work to build trust all you want, and then you could lose it like that. And I've seen it happen. I was explaining that before with getting coaches on the same page as skill coaches, getting strength coaches on the same page with skill coaches, but I don't see a lot of coaches care about how professional they are. I don't see coaches care about how well they communicate, um, how they present themselves, how they talk, the language they use, the image they put forth on social media. Like that is important for me. I don't think I would ever be in the role that I'm in if I was acting some other type of way that you might consider unprofessional or would taint the image of people that I'm associated with. I think that's one thing. I think what makes a great coach outside of that is how versatile are you? Like, how many options can you find for one situation? Um, and how well can you think of a adaptive plan that's rooted in principles that isn't set in stone by a particular system or model that's predetermined? Um, can you juggle that? Can you handle any challenge thrown at you? And that's what I learned in pro ball. I mean, Andrew, you were saying you could do a lot with a kettlebell earlier. You could do a lot with minimal equipment. I mean, I used to train guys in moldy hallways with power blocks, bands, RX pads, and kettlebells, and we had to make it work. And when you're put in that situation, you are reduced to what is what can I accomplish right now with what I have and what's good enough? And I think a great coach opts for the good enough approach all the time rather than perfect or strict adherence to whatever you programmed. It's looking at the big picture and not minute details and getting lost in hyper analytical thought processes that can eat up a lot of time and mental load that drain you. I've sat in front of a program building programs for hours on end. And the more you do it, that's a necessary growth period you have to go through. But once you're through it, you start to think with so much more clarity. And I think clarity and effectiveness are very, very like hand in hand concepts. I'm not saying you can't be effective if you're an overthinker or you put a lot of thought into things. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. But that's really important. You guys share whatever you want.
Yeah, I think great coaches, great coaches can control a room. I think that's one of the biggest things that if you can't, as a coach, control the room, you're not going to be able to implement the program that you want, and you're not going to be able to gain respect with your athletes and your coaching staff. So controlling a room is number one. The second thing that I have written down here when I'm thinking about what's a good coach and a good coach understands the sport and can speak the language. Um, Speaking the language, like I'll give football for an example. Like, can you speak the language of the athlete? Can you speak inside edge, outside edge? In baseball, can you speak, um, rundowns? Can you speak routes an outfielder makes? Those are things that I think gains respect by the athlete, and they're like, okay, like he cares enough to understand what I'm doing on a daily basis. Um, and those are two things I would say: commanding a room on the floor and then understanding the sport and speaking the language for more relatability with the athlete.
Yeah, I'll say the first thing too is I think a really good coach understands like that the Dunning-Kruger effect that like essentially we know nothing. Like I think they're always learning. Like the best coaches around me are always trying to find themselves in uncomfortable situations to be able to learn and to grow. And I think the best coaches put the right staff around them that not aren't going to agree with them, but are going to challenge their viewpoints and are going to bring new views to the table. I think that's the biggest hallmark of a really good coach, a really good director, and a really good leader in the sense that you're not hiring just a bunch of clones. You're hiring people for the situation, but you're also surrounding yourself with people that are going to make you and the athletes better. Um, I'd say the next thing that makes a really good coach is the standard to which they hold their athletes, they hold themselves, and they hold the program. Like I think a really good coach, like you could talk about being able to obviously like have variability in your program and everything like that. But I think if you don't have a set mindset of where you want the program to go, what you want your program to be, I think you can kind of get a little cloudy. And you want to have standards for your athletes. Like whatever training environment you make for them, you want them to have the best environment and the best basis in mind to be able to get the results possible. And I think if you don't have that mindset or you don't have those clear boundaries in line, I think things can get off the tracks very quickly. Um, And then I'd say also too, like I think the biggest thing of a good coach is understanding that they are a part of the human development model, not the entire piece of the pie. So I think for them, it's understanding that there are a lot of people that sit at the table, like sports medicine, psychology, the skill coaches, and I think being able to understand that you are here to help and assist with them is the biggest thing. Like I think there are a lot of coaches out there that think that the weight room is the athlete's bread and butter, and they're here to get better at it. And I think a lot of times they can shit on the support staff as well, and kind of just scoff them off to the side. But I think at the end of the day, we have to understand, and good coaches understand that they're a part of the process. We're here to win games. We're here to make them better and available. And I think when you can look at yourself as a piece or a wheel in the cog, I think things start to take more of a perspective in terms of what your actual role is and what you were there to do. But Wyatt, I didn't know these were your questions, man. It's good to see you.
His next question, Wyatt, for the sake of getting to this next one as well and making sure that we end on time here, I'm going to read this question about arm or like integrating with skill work because I really like this question, and then we'll move on. But he's asking if you have a skill imbalance or a skill issue, should we be integrated there? You see a lot of Eastern Asian baseball strength coaches working hands-on with arm paths. Should that be integrated here? So something that I don't like about the collegiate model is that we're not allowed to really give skill instruction. That's like an issue with collegiate sport. You're not allowed to do that. That's a compliance problem. Um, but you can go through your sport coach and say, hey, what are we working on here? And you can kind of speak through them too and kind of come to terms with what you want to do. I know some people break rules and do it anyway. I don't. I really try to adhere by those things. I'm not trying to get, cuffed for anything that I shouldn't be getting in trouble for. But I would love to see more application with the skill side and actually looking at like using the sport as the measure. And like I did a podcast with Bryce Kreider a long time ago. I think it was like, within the last year, but he talked about the skill being the measure and using the skill to gauge how things are going. And you could impact skill negatively and you can impact skill positively. I think what the Asian baseball side of things is doing is incredible. I see a ton of variability. I see a lot of practice with, understanding how the body actually works as a unit, which I don't think is what we're doing in the States right now, especially with the siloed model that we're currently stuck in, where you have strength coaches doing their thing, skill coaches doing another, and there's really no integration. And there's literal rules and laws that are binding us from actually creating those changes. Um, so that's a problem. I mean, I see athletes that we have who they don't even know that I'm doing it for this reason, but maybe they have like a terrible scap retraction, like their shoulder, they push the ball, or maybe they have no spinal mobility, and I'll have them do a super deep iso push up, or I'll have them do a back bridge progression on the wall, just to get some more spinal extension capacity. And they might not even know that that's why I'm doing it. And I can't even communicate that that's why I'm doing it because then I would be stepping on someone's toes on the skill side. So it's weird, you know what I mean? How you kind of navigate that, but I would love to see it integrated more. I think it should be integrated more. I think we're too focused on the physical side and the physical quality side. And I think we're actually doing more than we need to with the physical side. I mean, if Andrew's sitting here talking about doing 4 sessions a week that are 20 minutes long and still seeing good results and good health, why are we doing 4 to 5 hour long sessions a week and thinking that we need to be training that long? I think a lot more of that time and energy resources should be devoted towards skill integration and actually learning patterns in a fresh state.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this too, Wyatt, and I think we've talked about this a little bit, but when it comes to like, I try and go out to as many bullpen sessions as I can, and also just kind of pick the brains of my pitching coach and obviously my hitting coach as well, like what I see. I think that's the biggest thing, and Andrew talked about this too, is like being able to speak the language. Like I think like if you have a good basis of, and you've been around a lot of coaches and you've kind of seen the realm of pitching or hitting, like I think you can like make some objective, like be like, hey, like like what are you seeing on this guy? Like, especially in my injury meetings, like I sat down with my hitting coach at the end of the year or the end of the fall and was basically like, hey, like, how was the fall? Like, what did you see from our guys? What do they need to get better physically? But honestly, sometimes those conversations dive more into the skill side of things. And that's where me and him kind of got in touch with some things of, hey, I want to create performance prep for the guys before games. What do you think? Like, what kind of implements, like, what do you think we should work on? And then that conversation stems into like, hey, like, I think from my side of things, I think that a great prep for them would be doing, a beefier guy, one of our more power hitters. It's like, hey, if we want to target over their offseason, one of his weaknesses, let's have him swing a PVC pipe fast. And, or like in season, we're looking at him throwing heavy med balls, and just stuff like that. And with our pitching coach, I think the cool thing is he's brand new at our program. He's trying to get these guys used to being able to obviously pitching better, throwing more strikes. So the one thing he's asked me to do is create a little bit more variability within our med ball throws, a little bit more athletic movements. He's having them throw from the ground, having them throw on their butt, having them throw from the knee, double plays, stuff like that, where he's trying to get more variability from it. So he comes to me and he asks, hey, how can we try to implement a little bit more within the performance side of things? So I think being able to get that trust is number one from them, and being able to speak that language is a big basis for entry in that. Um, but yeah, I mean that's kind of what I would say for that. I mean, sometimes when I look at film on our guys and our pitching coach, he'll call me and be like, "Hey, check this out." And sometimes, like Joe said, I'll give them like, "Oh, we had a guy right now. He's a freshman. He just coming back from ACL surgery, and he's having trouble being able to open up his front foot. He's kind of closing off a little bit early." And for him, I'll kind of tell him, "Hey, like I want you to throw this med ball here. I want you to get in this position." And the way he lands, like understanding that he wants to land in that perfect like open position, but for some reason during his mechanics, like he just does not. He closes it off, puts more torque on his knee. So for me, I'm trying to see if that is a like dynamic issue or if that's just like an in-game situation. So yeah, I mean, I always though preface this though when I talk to a sport coach about something. I'm like, hey man, this is your bread and butter. Like, I don't want to step on your toes. Like, I'm just here to assist you. Like, I want my sport coaches to know that I'm not trying to invade on their space. But that's only a conversation that I have like when I feel like I have pretty good trust, or when they've opened up to me, or when I think I can make a useful change. Like I always say, like, hey, I think I could do something here, but obviously, like that's all you. Like, I don't want to do anything, that'll harm what you're trying to do with them. And maybe I shouldn't be saying that. Maybe I'm stepping on a lot of toes that way, but that's kind of how I've gotten a little bit of leeway and kind of spread the seeds, I guess you can say, to be able to do a little bit more, I guess, down the road.
Yeah, I think it helps to be out there and actively be watching the athlete perform their sport. That's like Hunter alluded to, is um, that's how you're going to find out the best way to attack the athlete from a corrective standpoint, from um, understanding what that athlete needs in terms of mechanics. It also is going to tell you, which is something I go back and forth about, and we do like a lot of other schools. We do assessments, we do um, muscular testing and hamstring testing. We do force plate mountain testing with bullpens, but you don't need that stuff. You can watch a bullpen, have a conversation with the pitching coach, and talk about it. I think one thing that I go back and forth about is the limiting factor. Is it the end all be all? Like, is T-spine extension gonna, baseball is such a sequence dominant sport. So is getting that athlete more T-spine extension going to help them throw harder? So in reality, is looking at the limiting factor going to help them throw harder, or do you need to look at um, their strengths? So like if someone is super tight, that might be what makes them really good. You know, like we had an athlete last year who um, big as strong as an ox, could take the 125-pound dumbbells and do them for 10 reps. He was 230. He was like 6 foot flat. I mean, he was strong as anything. Okay, but he threw the ball 95 miles an hour, but he wasn't mobile. He was very stiff athlete. And so if you try to make him more mobile, is is that going to help him? Or is he just a guy that feeds off of being tight? And so that's something that you learn from watching the athlete in sport, but again, I try not to step on the toes. It's something where I just have conversation and try to educate and try to come to a mutual conclusion with a lot of the sport coaches. But like Joe alluded to, it's something that you just can't really do in collegiate athletics.
All right, I want to get to
I think
Trevor's
Driveline the
club.
best example. Sorry, I was gonna say I
What?
think
No, you're
Driveline's the
good.
best example of that good blend. And
Who's
like I
that?
said, if
Hunter, what'd you
Driveline,
say? Oh yeah.
Driveline, Driveline's the
Yeah.
best example of being able to make those changes like in-house in the same space. But
Yep.
sorry.
All right, Trevor, I see he's sitting there waiting for his question. He is the last one here. Appreciate your patience, Trevor. Best ways to deliver workouts and track athletes' progress: Excel, Google Sheets, or some sort of app. Um, I use Excel. I know people that use Google Sheets. I would look at DSM Strength on YouTube. He has really good like sheet builders that you could do. He what kind of walks you through how to build some sheets also and track things. You could embed some really simple formulas. You would just have to add in, do a little typing every day to add loads in of what the athletes did. Personally, I take athletes' weight that they lifted and then I have them record their RIR. And based off that, I have a running progression and like a running graph of what their predicted 1RM was that day based on the reps they did, the reps in reserve that they had, and the weight that they lifted. And that's just Epley's equation. Um, I'll actually type that equation in here right now for you. Um, I'll type the equation after I finish answering the question. But Excel, I use Excel. Um, I actually have a downloadable template in our community as well, which is it's a template ready to go. But I call it the intermittent variation template, and I call it that because it's a front and back sheet. It's ready to be printed front and back, and it allows you to change exercises every other week, and it allows you to change intensity and volume, sets and reps every single week. So you could have more freedom to tinker with what you want to mess with. I know a lot of cards, you'll print them out and like you've got the same exercises for 4 weeks straight. So I've built my own sheet out to where I've got more freedom to program how I feel like every team sport athlete should be programmed for because every week is different. So that's what I use in season. I use that template, and I'll have if we have a week that has 5 games, I have the freedom to change things based off what that week might look like in retrospect, and then I've got weeks where we don't play any games until the weekend, and then I can up the intensity or volume on those weeks more readily and more acutely. But
We
you,
we
you
use we use Team Builder. Um, but yeah, it's I don't mind, like Excel is what I used before I got to Virginia. Excel is a great way if you can formulate a lot of equations in Excel, you can come up with some pretty cool program templates. Um, and so Excel is a great, I would choose Excel over Google Sheets. I'll double down on what Joe said. DSM strength, and then also Excel trick for sports is another good one that you can use on YouTube.
Yeah, I'll be the devil's advocate here. I kind of like Google Sheets a little bit. Like I like Google Sheets when it comes to my like tracking because a lot of times my support coaches and ATs kind of want to see some of the stuff as well. So I think it's an easy way to share between staffs and share between people. I think Excel is like sending an Excel sheet through email can be a little bit I don't want to say messy, but over like a bunch of weeks being like, hey, here's your weekly email. Like I think that gets buried in my sport coach's emails where he can just log on to the strength and conditioning dashboard for the in season and just kind of see what we're doing there. But yeah, I would agree with obviously what Joe and them said, like DSM. Adam Virgil as well, he had a YouTube page up for a while that had some good tutorials. I don't know if he still has the YouTube up, it's been a while, but finding kind of a formula and a sheet for that to be able to categorize your data is really good. I mean, I use sheets for, just to track obviously our jumps, our sprints, and obviously like, our overcoming isometrics that we do as well. And I can track it over a period of time and kind of format that back to like this main dashboard sheet that I can show my sport coaches. And the other tabs obviously in there are just for myself kind of to have. But yeah, we don't all have the Virginia money that Andrew's got for that team builder. That's one of our big things that we want to get is team builder. But yeah.
All right, guys. That seems to be all the questions for tonight. Um, like I said before, we're really excited about the future with this community. We're going to do more of these Q&As. One of our goals is to do one of these every single month. There will be one in December. We hope to see you back here again for that one. We will also be sending out a lot of free value for you guys, a lot of like free tidbits over email. You can feel free to read those, ask us questions in the next Q&A based on those, or you can unsubscribe if you don't like being bothered. That's totally cool too. But yeah, we would love to help you guys more. We think that this community has a lot of potential to take off. We have a lot of good guests coming on. Just to give you a little breakdown of who we've already had, we have a guest speaker call from Blaine McConnell on speed development. We've got Jared Slater. We just had the entire Chicago Cubs minor league strength staff come on and talk about their warm-up gamification model. It was an incredible talk. We have Tanner Kerr coming on in December. He's going to talk about individualization based on speed and power data. That's also going to be an incredible conversation. And then we have Ryan Aguirre coming on in January, who's going to talk about how anatomy, like musculoskeletal anatomy, mainly rib cage and pelvis orientations, how you should consider those when you're designing a strength program, and also how they impact human movement. So that's going to be a really cool one as well. He's exclusively baseball as well. He works with pro guys, and he's the owner of a sports science company as well. So that'll be a great talk. Um, we have a lot of people that we want to bring on here and create like the first ever like major baseball and softball learning hub that there is with the expertise that we have readily available. I can't think of an opportunity like this that's been out there before. Things like Strength Coach Network, sure, but that was much more broad. This is a lot more niche for a very specific demographic of person. So um, that's all I got. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to shoot us DMs. We'd be happy to talk to you. But with that, I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you so much for coming on. Enjoy the rest of your night and happy Thanksgiving.
Appreciate it, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Post in the Discord if you have questions.
Yeah, or DM me and Andrew,
Yep.
or DM the BPN as well. But we're super excited to be a part of this, and we appreciate you guys being on.